My friend, you and I have known each other for a long time.
Since the
And we,
dinosaurs. Yeah.
this, well, I wasn't going to go that far back.
I mean, some would argue that we are dinosaurs, but that's neither here nor there.
I don't think we are. I don't think we are. I mean, I'm in a technology company, and here in my world, it's innovate or die.
Hmm.
You are in a position today where you're fortunately able to pay it forward, which I would argue everybody is in that position, no matter what their station in life. You've chosen though to make it a part of your professional life and your personal life. And you and I have had many very good, thoughtful discussions about business and life. And I met your beautiful son when he was in diapers, and
He just turned 9, Bob. Can you believe that? Blink and a decade passes by.
well,
Yeah.
my daughter, who is 48, lamented to me one day that she had a child, and she said, "My baby's growing up." And I looked at her and said, "I don't know who you think you're talking to."
That reminds me of, as you know, I love music and I love lyrics, and I can't help but ponder on those Bob Seger lyrics from Like a Rock. 20 years now, where'd they go? 20 years, where'd they go? Literally 2 decades, and it's gone in an instant.
In an instant, yeah.
Yeah.
Our business is going to turn 25 years old here very soon. We're going to be entering our 25th year, and I don't know how many businesses can say that they're 25 years old, but not that many compared to
Yeah. Yeah.
But
No, what you've accomplished there is pretty impressive, and it all boils down to consistency, exceeding expectations, and taking care of the customer. And you and I, above and beyond our friendship, we've done business in the past, and you tick all 3 of those boxes. And I think at the end of the day, that's what it boils down to.
It's a nice thing to say. Thanks, I appreciate that. And you have been a client of mine. Step along the way. So and I would also say that you're one of those good clients, not the kind because you pay your bills, but because you're a good listener. I mean, the first requisite, and I know you know this in your consulting practice, that my job is to consult, your job is to listen. And if you choose not to listen, shame on you. But that really good client is the one that does listen.
I think that's true of life in general, right? I mean, I always get accused of being very quiet when I'm in meetings, but I know what I know, and I don't have to prove to anybody that I know what I know. And I'd rather sit there and learn and soak it all in. And then when I do say something, hopefully it's meaningful, as opposed to just hearing myself talk. And, I think we both know a lot of people who just love the sound of their own voice. So.
Oh, yeah. It was Confucius that said, if you're the smartest man in the room, you're in the wrong room.
You're in the wrong room. Exactly right. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, but I think a lot of that comes with experience too, Simon. I mean, we are all, when they talk about the impetuous youth, it really is the impetuous youth. I mean, we are all very impetuous when we're young, but then again, we don't realize that a clock is ticking. And then when we finally do realize that I think is what kicks off that thing they call maturity. So the Critical Thought Lab, if you don't mind, I'd like to just move right into that. And thank you very much for taking the time, because I know that time is something that is important to you. And I know also that relationships are really important to you. You're careful. You're very, very careful. And so I'm grateful that you would consider me one of those few people that can, as you put it, sit at your table. So the Critical Thought Lab brings to mind so many different things, but I do know that you are a very deep thinker, and you read a lot, and you study a lot, and you do listen a lot. What brought you to this?
Oh, it's a great question. And there's so many things that brought me to this, and I'm sure we'll get into them. One of them is the circumstances surrounding my son, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. The other was, I'm a ferocious reader. As you know, I read 4 to 5 books a week, and I love to just get knowledge. And I think I've had an interesting 40 years, in terms of my career, and I've done some things that some people are not as fortunate to be able to do. I've done them all over the globe. I've done them in different settings, different countries, different industries, and I felt that I was a position in my life where it was time to pay some of it forward and to just share some of those experiences and to share some of the tools that I've used in my career and in my personal life to help me. I don't want to sound like it's me preaching. It's certainly not, because the one thing I realized, the more I know, the less I know. And I remember when I as you know, I have a PhD I got from Virginia Tech, and when I left, I came out fully equipped for life in the 13th century. Didn't really teach me much about reality. Certainly didn't teach me critical thinking, which you'd think a PhD level course would teach you critical thinking, but it didn't. So I wanted to pay it forward.
I think you lose that at the master's level.
You do. And, I have friends who are very high up in corporate structures, in public companies and private companies, both in Europe and the United States. And they say, we don't want to hire MBAs anymore. We don't want to hire people with business degrees, because they think in a box. They're taught certain skills and certain formulas, but they don't have the ability to think critically. So, I wanted to pay it forward, as I said. And the other thing that really prompted me, I emigrated to the United States 37 years ago. I'm a US citizen, and I'm very proud of that. I think it's the best country in the world, despite the challenges that we're going through right now. But it's not the country that I emigrated to. It's changed dramatically in the past decade or so. And you mentioned this earlier in our off the mic conversation. It's extreme polarization, a high level of isolation, a high level of extremism. That there's no gray anymore. I remember when you used to be able to have an intellectual conversation, and you could say that this is white, and I could say that that is black, and that you'd reach across the aisle. And I'm not just talking politics, by the way. I'm talking, life in general. And there'd be a middle ground. There's no middle ground anymore. And I think a lot of that is to do with the way that society has evolved. I mean, 86%, Bob, 86% of Americans get their news online. And of the 86 that get their news online, the 86%, 60% of that 86% get their news from social media, from Facebook, from Instagram, from Snapchat, or wherever they choose to get it from. Think about that. You get 60% of your news from social media. Social media is not news. Social media by the time it gets to you, it's been filtered so many times, it's not news. And what happens is, as you know, but social media creates these algorithms based on your search patterns, based on what you're interested in. And they feed you information that confirms your belief system. So if I said that the earth is flat, and I start Googling that the earth is flat, I'm going to get a bunch of information over the course of the next several weeks, which supports my point of view. That just makes me more passionate about my point of view, because I'm being told I'm right. And I think social media and online platforms in general have a lot to answer for when it comes to this polarization and this extremism and this hatred. And we all live on 5-second sound bites, right? If you say it loud enough, if you say it often enough, and you say it passionately enough, it must be true. So how does that tie in with the Critical Thought Lab? Well, the only way to combat a lot of that is to have a mental bag of tools that you can use to decipher through the noise, to cut through the chaos and decipher through the noise. And we're not taught that in school for the most part. We're not taught when we join an organization how to do that, how to think critically. So I think this lack of critical thinking, combined with what's happening with the online platforms and social media, has put us in a very sickly and polarized society. I worry about the kind of society that my 9-year-old son is going to grow up in, based on the things we're seeing right now. I'm sorry, that was a lot of information, but it's just
no.
I'm very passionate about it,
Never enough, my friend. I mean, sitting to my right, you can't see it, but I've got MSNBC on right now, and I will flip to CNN, and then I will flip to Fox, and I'll watch. I will watch all three. But that, it's for me, it's almost like entertainment. I'm a bit of a junkie. even on my Facebook posts, I get a little political. I think you probably know that.
Yep.
But
I do like the warning. I do like the warning you put on there now, though. Warning, political.
Yeah, all caps. That's for those people who don't think we should be political on Facebook.
Right.
There are those that I don't know where they're getting their news, but I try not to poke. I try not to be vitriolic. I don't think I'm terribly argumentative. I like to make a point, but part of that though is designed to confuse those algorithms. It is really hard to confuse algorithms. I mean, Lisa and I are getting ready to redo one of our rooms in our house, and so I happened to Google tile. All right, within seconds, I was getting ads on Facebook for tile. Where to buy my tile? Where to buy tiles? I don't know that there's anything bad about that. I think I think it's called remarketing, and I think that's good. But when it's information like the Earth is flat, when it is intentionally meant to mislead, I don't know what we're going to do about it.
That's part of the issue. I mean, there's a two-pronged issue here, Bob. One is the news, quote unquote, that we do get is not really news. As you just said, it's entertainment, it's opinion. I mean, I remember reading or watching old reruns of Walter Cronkite, right? Walter Cronkite would get on the evening news and say, today in Ethiopia, 2,000 people are facing famine. The weather tonight will be sunny. And there was no commentary, right? That there was no opinion attached to that. There isn't a news channel, for the most part, whether it be print, whether it be, electronic, that nowadays doesn't confuse opinions with news. So the first problem is what we're being fed through those algorithms is a reinforcing bubble. It's an echo chamber, and we all live on our own, hypersensitive echo chambers. So we keep getting reinforced information, which makes us think that we're right. And then the second problem is, even if we wanted to get to the facts, where would we go? Well, where do you get that news? It used to be Reuters. It used to be the BBC. It used to be the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times. But even those publications nowadays are biased. So even if you wanted to get the facts, where do you get them? That's the second challenge. And I said there was two. There's actually three. Most people in general have neither the time nor the desire to go digging. It's just a fact of life. They would rather live off of 5-second sound bites. And if it's a catchy phrase, and as I said earlier, if you say it loud enough and passionately enough, whichever side of the fence you're on, then it must be true. And it's a sad state of affairs that intellectual curiosity and intellectualism in general, both in the United States and in many countries in Europe, is on a decline. In fact, it's looked down upon. I mean, you can track it. The level of negativity towards the intelligentsia in Europe especially, but here in the United States too, it is astounding. It's astounding. So when you take that away, there's a void, and it gets filled by populist notions and populist commentary.
As Isaac Asimov said, that the common talk today is that your intelligence is not as important as my ignorance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's very easy to create a belief in the masses, and I don't want to get too ethereal here, but if you create division, I mean this goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. If you create division amongst the population, and you convince them that the other side is out to get them, and the other side is bad, and they start fighting among themselves, then they are the easiest people in the world to control. It's called propaganda. And you can look at it throughout the decades of history. It's happened. It's the same formula. It's happened time and time again.
Putin proves that it is still a skill. I mean, I mean, like you look at the way Putin uses his propaganda. Trump was good at it. Is good at it. I mean, he's skilled to the point where he understands that if you start posting stuff at 3 a.m, it's going to hit and carry through the next day, and whoever you're posting about, does not have the opportunity, and you're always responding. We are victims of propaganda big time, and
Yep.
we should be very concerned. I don't know. I agree with you that if I've got my grandson who's 11, and you got your son who's 9, and I'm like, geez, I don't know what they're going to go through. We were with a math teacher, a high school math teacher, algebra teacher, actually, a couple weeks ago in North Carolina, and she was telling me that her students, when she shows them a clock, they cannot tell time. I don't know if that's good or bad, Simon. I think it's bad. It sounds bad. I mean, I wear a watch. Thank goodness I do, because it's how I know what time it is. But
well, I think what's happening is that we're becoming very isolationist, and I talk to people who are successful. When I say successful, financially successful, intelligent, smart, friends of mine, who absolutely have no idea, zero, what's going on in the Middle East. Well, obviously, over the past few weeks, that they have a better inkling now, but prior to that, they couldn't tell you where Iran was compared to Iraq. They couldn't tell you what's going on in Asia. And more importantly, they don't think it's important. They don't think it's important to learn about it and to understand it, because they don't think it impacts the United States of America.
Well, they don't think it impacts 123 Main.
Right.
Main Street. I mean,
right. And it's very worrying, because it's all interconnected. So, what happens in Asia certainly impacts the United States of America. What happens in Europe certainly impacts the United States of America. But so many people have become more and more isolationist. We're fine. We just leave us alone, let us handle our own business, which we're not doing a very good job of, by the way. And everything will be hunky-dory. And I don't see it like that. I'm a globalist. And when I say a globalist, I don't mean that in the traditional industrialization sense of the word, but I've spent my entire life building bridges, not building walls. I've spent my entire life building bridges with people, with organizations, with countries, and been fortunate enough to travel to goodness knows how many countries in the world, lived in dozens. And travel is I think it was Mark Twain that said, travel is the cure for racism. Yeah. Right? Because you see and you live in another country. And I'm not talking about going to an all-inclusive resort in Cancun and never leaving the resort, right? I'm talking about going and seeing the country, meeting and living with the people of that country. And it gives you a different perspective. So as a child, and you know this, Bob, I was fortunate enough to live in Indonesia, Ethiopia, Djibouti on the Horn of Africa, Germany, England, Spain, spent some time in the Far East, Singapore, Australia. I've lived all over the world, and I've learned more through traveling and meeting people than I ever learned through getting a PhD.
Well, and you know what, and I will take that to a little bit more finer detail. The food. I would bet you this, Simon. I would bet you that you have never tasted bat wing. Now, I've had bat wing, and I had bat wing in El Salvador, and it tasted a lot like chicken. Mm-hmm. But when you go into a country or a place that is new, to suggest that I want to go to what they would call typical. So when I lived in Sweden, I loved to go find out and eat at the local bar and eat good Swedish food, good herring, good Swedish meatballs, good, typical food. Mm-hmm. Learn about people, particularly when you watch what they order. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yep.
Yeah. I'm a bit.
I agree though. I was just in London for 10 days, and we went to watch some rugby tournaments out there, and I said to the folks that we were with, I said, we're not going to do the tourist things. We're not going to, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the best Indian restaurant you've probably ever been to in your life, because as you know, the Indian food in Great Britain, especially in London, is tremendous. So I said, we're going to go to the best Thai restaurant you've probably ever been to. And, you know, and talk to the people there, not just say, take my order, but talk to them, you know, and have a conversation. Yep. And I think the art of conversation is diminishing and unfortunately disappearing rapidly. It's very hard to have a conversation with people for the most part about sensitive subjects, because it degenerates pretty quickly into a personal attack, or they bring in the counter argument. You know, if I talk about politics just very briefly, if I say something negative about Trump, somebody will automatically bring in Biden and say, well, it's not as bad as Biden. If I say something negative about Biden, you know, they'll bring in Trump. And it's like, we're talking two separate subjects, but it's gotten so full of hatred that you almost don't engage in those kinds of conversations anymore. And if you can't engage in those and you can't reach a compromise, then where are we headed as a society?
I, as you know, love Washington, D.C. I'm there every chance I get. Our daughter lives there, so our grandson lives there. So when I get to D.C., I love D.C. One of the things I really like about Washington, D.C. is that if you talk about politics in Washington, D.C., you are not the anomaly. You're part of the culture. Everybody in D.C. is talking politics. Even the cab drivers will talk politics with you without getting all vitriolic and upset and nasty. A good friend of mine owns a really nice restaurant right on Capitol Hill called the Monocle. I think you've been there with me.
Yeah, I've been there. I've been there with you. Yep.
Yeah. And Nick was a Democrat. He's off the boat from Greece, and he was a Democrat when he first came to the United States, and running that very successful restaurant for a good friend of his. And they were very successful until one day Mike Mansfield, who was then the majority leader in the United States Senate, came up with this idea that lobbyists shall not ever spend more than $50 on a member of Congress without reporting it. And so it immediately cut his income down by like 3/4. Well, he's a radical Republican right now, as you might imagine. Mm-hmm. So now when I go in there, and he knows I'm not, so now when I go in there, whoever I'm with, he makes it a real good point to say, now you know you're hanging around with a GD Democrat, right?
Yeah, and of course, I mean, it goes back to this.
But he's joking. I will tell you, for him and for me, we have fun with it.
Yeah, yeah, and that, you know, that's at a different level because you have a relationship. But I think for anybody to grow personally, right? And I'm not talking about career. I'm talking about personal. To have personal growth, you have to be able to challenge your own thoughts and your own beliefs. And the only way to do that is through critical thinking. And if you don't have those critical thinking skills, how do you challenge? How do you say to yourself, you know, maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe I need to look at it from a different perspective. Maybe I need to go read something. Maybe I need to talk to somebody who has a total opposite views and see whether I feel passionate about what I believe in. And not just passionate, because usually the people who are the most passionate are the ones that really don't have the facts and the information, and they try and cover it up with passion. But you really have to make informed, objective decisions to decipher through the noise. You need a filter. And that filter, at least in my opinion, is critical thinking. You need to be able to think critically.
And the 4 tenets that you have listed here: adventure, perseverance, innovation, reinvention. I mean, those are what you would say that if you have those 4 tenets and practice those 4, and by practice, I mean, not just try to use them, but consciously think about them and practice them. Are those the foundation for critical thinking? As far as
to some extent. I mean, there are critical thinking models out there, Bob. There are hundreds of critical thinking models, and you know, you couldn't familiarize yourself with all of them, you know, if you had 10 years to spare. But there are ones that are more useful than others, and you see it in every day. I mean, there's a critical thinking model out there called first principles thinking, right? And that's been around since Socrates, but perhaps the person who's made it most popular in the past decade or so is Elon Musk. right? And he openly admits that his decision-making process uses first principles thinking. And first principles thinking simply tears things down to their basic elements and says, let's not accept the status quo. Let's go back. I don't accept that I can't build a rocket ship, literally, right, for far less money than you guys do. Why do you guys spend so much money? Well, we spend so much money because we do this, because we do that. We can't reuse the rocket ship. Oh, you can't reuse the rocket ship. Why is that? Well, because it burns up. And well, what would happen if you could reuse the rocket ship? What would that do to your cost structure? Well, we need this certain kind of mineral, this certain kind of element in it. And well, do you really? Maybe there's a substitute for that. So he takes things down to their very basis. And that philosophy, that model, first principle thinking, you see it all around. You see it in business. Another one, which we published in the last episode of Insights, which is, by the way, we have a complimentary free newsletter on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And then we do what's called a deep dive series on Fridays also, which is for our subscription members. But the last Friday, we talked about marginal gains theory. Marginal gains theory was made pretty famous by Sir Brailsford, who was headed up the British cycling team. And his philosophy was, and by the way, he doesn't own marginal gains theory. It's been around for centuries, but he took it and popularized it, is that improvement is not based on changing the world overnight. Improvement is based on tiny incremental little bits of progress over a multitude of things. So he took the British cycling team, which was failing at the time, and he looked at everything: the size of the seat, the aerodynamics of the seat, what gel they put in their hair when they were going out in a race, what tape they used on the bike. Of course, he looked at the tires and the textiles that were used in making tires. He looked at all the big things too, but he looked at a multitude of little things. And if you had 1% gain over these little things over the course of time, like a year, you have a 3,700% increase in total effectiveness. And he took the British cycling team from zero, and I think they won 16 championships over the course of the next 16 years. So you can use that in any aspect of business, but you have to have a tool. You have to have a tool. There was a guy who came out in the 1980s or 90s, I forget now, called Edward de Bono. And Edward de Bono came out with a philosophy called the 6 hats philosophy. When you're in meetings and you give each person a hat. So you have one person who wears a red hat, one person who wears a blue hat, green hat, et cetera, and each hat has a different meaning. I'll get the hat and the roles wrong, but basically the black hat was the pessimist. So your role in this meeting, Mr. or Mrs. Black Hat, is to question everything, to be the pessimist, say that's not possible. The white hat is the optimist. So in this meeting, John, Mary, your role is to say, well, let's not focus on the worst that can happen. Let's focus on the best that could happen, blah, blah, blah. Then you have somebody who is a very objective. So he wants data, or she wants data to support what's being said. Then you have the emotional person. So the point is, you have these groups in business, and maybe to a certain extent in personal lives, because it's human behavior, that you surround yourself with people who are like you. And therefore you get consensus, and some terrible decisions are made based on consensus. Terrible. If you have an organization or you have a group of friends, but let's stick to the world of business, it's good to have divergent views, to be able to express those. It gets to a better decision. If you have everybody in the room, I always used to say, if you have more than 2 people in the room that agree with each other, one of them's redundant, right? And I'm the president, so I'm not going anywhere. Right? So you really need to be able to use these models, and you can call it a theory, you can call it a model, you can just call it a way of thinking. But there are literally hundreds of them out there that can help you make better decisions. And I guess that's the real impetus behind the Critical Thought Lab. I've seen so many organizations negatively impact the bottom line because people aren't making good decisions. They're making.
You had posted one the other day in the newsletter. I think it might have been yesterday or the day before yesterday, from was it Dr. Hutchinson, that talked about not what you're thinking, but how you're thinking.
How you think.
Yeah.
So true.
Roll that out for me a little bit.
So sure, it's important about, what you think. What's probably more important is how you think about it. And we're all fed information, but how do we think about it? Are we skeptical? Do we accept it? Another mental model is called anchoring theory. You and I have both been in negotiations. So let's say let's say I'm trying to sell I'm trying to sell a car, and I'll throw out a number. Let's say the car's worth 30 grand, but I'm trying to sell it. So I'm a businessman. I'll throw out a number. You know what? This number this car is worth 50 grand. That becomes the anchor in the mind of the person you're dealing with. So we're starting at 50 grand. We shouldn't be starting at 50 grand. We should be starting at 35 grand. But I've now gone and placed an anchor in his or her mind that says it's worth 50 grand. So if we whittle it down to 40 grand, he or she thinks they've got a good deal. Well, they really didn't get a good deal. It's anchoring. So, the quote by Hutchinson is like, how you think is probably more important than what you think. It's applicable not just to careers, but to personal relationship, to personal growth and development. And that's really what I wanted to share in the Critical Thought Lab. We have this, as I said, complimentary newsletter. We have the deep dives on Friday where we look at books and we summarize them. Not only that, but I write an article, and every article that I write, I've probably spent a minimum of 40 hours preparing that and working on it over the course of the last year or so. And then we have, of course, the one-on-one coaching. Because not everybody reads. People would just prefer to have a conversation like this. And it's to help people make better decisions, get out, become unstuck, get out of the rut they're in. Maybe they feel they can't climb the corporate ladder quick enough. Why? Maybe they're stuck in a personal relationship that they're not happy with, or they have, self-esteem issues. And that's where the one-on-one coaching comes in. And I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, but I have messed up enough in my life to have learned some lessons. And
you see a difference between coaching and mentoring?
I'm sorry?
See a difference between coaching and mentoring?
Yeah, I do. I think a mentor is somebody that you look up to and you try and emulate to a certain degree, whereas coaching is bringing out the best in people based on the skill set and the talent that they have. So I view coaching as being far more holistic than mentoring.
Who coaches?
I've never been asked that before. Yeah.
Who coaches the coach?
Who coaches the coach? Well, I've had some amazing coaches and mentors in my life. Ed McMullen Sr., who I know you know very well. God bless his soul. He was a friend. He was a father figure. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself.
Did you tell the story that you one day were lamenting to Ed McMullen about getting a date with the right kind of person? He was just that practical guy.
Ed would have I call them Edisms. And he had that Southern Mississippi drawl, And by the way, Ed, for those people listening to this who don't know Ed, he was the founder of Marriott Vacation Club and the founder of Hilton Grand Vacations. Yep. And before that, he was the insurance business. But he took me under his wing when he was with Hilton, and he had these Edisms. And I remember one day I'd moved to Orlando to be his right hand, and I was not having much success in my romantic life. And so I spilled the beans for about 45 minutes. And as you know, for me, Bob, that's very hard for me to get that deep and personal for 45 minutes. But I did. And at the end of it, he just looked at me, and he could never say Simon because of his accent. He used to say salmon, like the fish. So he always called me Salmon. So I spilled my guts out for 45 minutes. And at the end of it, and he looks at me, and he puts his papers in his briefcase. He's obviously going home. And he looks at me and he says, Salmon, he says, let me tell you something, son. You're fishing a catfish pond. You're going to catch catfish. I'm like, what the heck does that mean? I just spent 45 minutes, bearing my soul to you. And you're giving me some analogy about catching catfish in a catfish pond. What he meant by that was, if you surround yourself with the inappropriate people, then those are the kind of people that you're going to find in your life. So stop fishing in a catfish pond if you don't want to catch catfish. He had hundreds of those Edisons.
Yeah.
So he was a great mentor, a gentleman called Perry Snyderman, who I know you know very well.
Yep.
I'll tell you a quick story about Perry Snyderman. Again, he took me under his wing when he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. But there was a time, it must be 2005, maybe. I had a cash flow problem, and I needed $250,000 for 30 days. And I went to Perry Snyderman, and the offices were in Northbrook, Illinois at the time. And right next to the office, there was a burger place. It's probably still there, called Beinlich's Burgers. And whenever he thought I needed guidance, he would take me to Beinlich's Burgers. And needless to say, we spent a lot of time in Beinlich's Burgers. So he said, okay, let's go to lunch. So I went to lunch. He said, what do you need the money for? So I explained my situation. And he said, and I needed it for 60 days. And he said, are you going to pay the money back, Simon? I said, day 61, I'll pay you the money back. Right there in the middle of the restaurant, he took out a checkbook and he wrote a check for $250,000, handed it to me. No agreement, just a handshake and eye contact. And day 61, I went back to his office and had a check, and I'd assigned some arbitrary interest rate to it because I felt that was the appropriate thing to do, and said, here. And he looked at the amount and he said, what's this? I said, well, that's the money you loaned to me, and with an X% interest. And he tore the check up and he said, pay me back the $250,000. Says, buy me a box of cigars. Friends don't charge friends interest. And I'm like, wow.
And I'm surprised he didn't jump your chili a little bit by saying that was not our deal.
Right. Well, I mean,
I can see him saying that.
Trust me, he could be, as you know, he could be a tough cookie too. I remember a time when we had a contract that was a pretty bad contract. It had been signed, and he called me into his office with a gentleman by the name of Craig Goldstein, who was our CFO.
I remember Craig.
Yeah, great. Just what a CFO, man. Just a hugely talented guy. Anyway, calls us into his office, and Perry Snyderman goes, says, this contract, this is a BS contract. We never should have signed it. It's terrible. And he says, who signed it? So I said, well, actually, Perry, you signed it. You're the one who signed it. And with a straight face, he looks at Craig and he goes, how could you guys let me sign this? This is your fault. So he could be a tough cookie too,
Yeah. But you know what? He, one time, if you remember one time when we did business very early on, I was representing a company that didn't do what they were supposed to do. And you and I, we got it behind us very quickly. I remember we went to dinner with Chris by that office in Illinois, and we got past it really fast. And Simon, thank you for that, by the way. But then Perry, I didn't know him very well at the time, but I had a bad feeling that I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I somehow had needed to get back into the grace somehow. And so I ran into him and I looked at him and I said, Perry, I'm very, very sorry. I really messed up. And he said, that's all you needed to say. It's over. Thank you. Boom. We had a cigar and a drink. So
yeah, I mean, he was that kind of gentleman. I remember when I left Shell Vacations to become president and CEO of Diamond Resorts, and I got into a lawsuit for violation of my non-compete, and I went to dinner with Perry, and he said, this is probably going to get pretty messy. He said, are you sure you've made the right decision? And I said, Perry, I've thought about this. It's a tremendous opportunity. I'm going to go be president, CEO of Diamond Resorts. Yes, I've thought about it. And he looked at me and he said, same thing. He says, that's all I needed to hear. He said, just remember, he said, it's going to get messy, but do not let that get in the way of our friendship. Classy guy.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you that, the criticalthoughtlab.com. I think I was one of the first earliest subscribers.
You were, yep.
I would like to say I was the first, so let me think that, okay?
Yeah, just founding member.
Boy, if I had a dime for every one of those, every company that I was promised 10% stock ownership in, I've learned the difference between an idea and a good idea. A good idea is
Yes,
when you
yes.
go off.
We've both been down that avenue a few times.
Oh, yeah, that's, Bob, I have an idea. My first question is who's going to write the first check? So Simon, I will tell you that I'm really proud of you because I've been following you, not just as a friend, but just reading your missives on LinkedIn and watching how you treat your son. My God, what a beautiful story. What a beautiful story that is. And he's an amazing success story right now.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. He's on the autism spectrum, correct?
Correct.
But he's bilingual, right?
So as you followed Grayson. I think you met him when he was 8 or 9 months old. You've followed him all these years. Grayson is his name is Grayson Beckett Welch Maloney. So go figure. He lives in Mexico with his mom. So I go down there probably every few weeks to spend 4 or 5 days with him. So very involved with his life, talk to him daily, multiple times a day, have a wonderful relationship with his mother. She was just here actually with Grayson for 2 weeks over my birthday in August. But Grayson's on the spectrum. I know more about the autism spectrum now than I could have possibly imagined. And what I've learned is there's no one kind of autism, right? Every child, every person is different. And you can Google autism right now and you'll see the 3 kinds of autism, the 7 kinds of autism, the 4 kinds of, it's all BS. It's all BS. Every child is very different. And Grayson did not speak until he was 5. And when I say speak, and close to the end of being 5, by the way, closer to 6, he didn't say a single word, nothing. And we were fortunate enough to have the financial means to take him to every speech therapist, you name it, as individuals specializing in the spectrum. None of them really helped. And it got to the point where they said, you need to teach him sign language. And I refused to teach him sign language because
I was one of those proponents, if you remember.
I do. Yep, I do. Or given your history with your daughter, I understand why. But I refused to. And he would go to the fridge and he'd want something and point at it. And I would make him grunt. I would make him make some kind of sound to prove to me what he wanted as opposed to just pointing. And his mother and I were just adamant about this. So we didn't teach him sign language. We found him some good private speech therapists. And now he's bilingual. He speaks Spanish fluently. He speaks English fluently. He's 9 years old. 3 years later, he speaks 2 languages, which, by the way, was part of the issue too. Learning 2 languages, you're on the autism spectrum. It was all challenging. But when we did find a speech therapist, when he just had started talking about a year, maybe 12 to 15 months, he just started talking, but it was garbage. And we took him to a speech therapist. And interestingly enough, she said, she did some analysis on it. And she said, he's making perfect sense, but he's not using vowels. He wasn't using vowels. So he would leave out, A, I, O, U. But she said, here, if you put these letters in what he just said, this is what it, and it was mind-blowing to me that he was actually speaking in full sentences, just not using vowels.
Wow.
And that was a breakthrough for us.
Wow.
That was a breakthrough. And he would get so frustrated and became aggressive because in his mind, he was saying a full sentence.
Yeah.
Like, why can't you understand me? And, going to school was just a nightmare because, first of all, he lives in Mexico. He's, twice the height that he should be for some kid his age. He's blonde. He's a gringo, and he couldn't speak. So kids can be very cruel sometimes, as you can imagine. And once we found out that it was this vowel issue, then our line of speech therapy took a different turn, and here we are today. Here we are today. It's been a miracle, and it taught me about mental models. Boy, did I have to change my view of the world when I had a son who was on the autism spectrum.
Listen, my daughter, as you know, she's deaf. And some people confuse that with being hard of hearing, but she is in fact deaf. And so I asked her several years ago, why is it that a deaf girl could get a PhD in clinical psychology? How did you, what was the real thing behind that? How did you do that? And she gave me a brilliant answer. And it's one that I remember to this day. And it's one that you just reminded me of. And she said, Dad, you don't have to hear to be a good listener.
Hmm.
And in which, like, okay, the audiologist in your case heard and listened differently than you were. Your brain worked in a totally different way. So we learned from those perceived handicaps.
Yeah, and as businessmen, Bob, I mean, and males, I guess, we're trained to fix things, right? That's how our mind works for the most part. Well, let me just tell me what I need to do to fix it, right? It can be fixed. And in business, that I've never met a problem that with some deep thought and a lot of good team members alongside me couldn't be solved. So this was new to me, and it challenged my own belief system. It challenged my own self-worth. Here I am, pretty successful in the business world, and I can't even help my own son.
8 months old, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it really, really threw me for a loop. In terms
you learn patience too, don't you?
You learn patience, and you learn that, because he's having a meltdown because the fire alarm went off or something. And as you know, noise sensitivity is a big issue with children, some children on the spectrum. Because he's having a meltdown and just hyperventilating and literally making himself sick, telling him to calm down is not going to help. I wish it were that easy. It's not. But laying on the floor next to him, not touching him, laying on the floor next to him with a pillow under his head and a pillow under my head, just staring at the ceiling and waiting for him to reach out and touch my hand, as opposed to vice versa. It just changes the way you think about things.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's a beautiful story. So I'm gonna move us to the next phase here, if you're okay with that, and we'll talk about, as you may recall.
Well, wait a minute. We have 5 hours left, right?
4.5. Okay. I'll take all day. I'm fine with this, But what I was gonna share was that this video is gonna be on our YouTube channel. So if you go to the BobCast YouTube channel, you can find it through the Mobius VP website. So mobiusvp.com, and click on the channel. And so here in about a week, this will get all edited and prettied up, and probably put a little makeup on you.
Yeah, I need it. Yeah, I need it. Get rid of some of those wrinkles.
I was going to put some in. I mean, but the next phase of this thing is I always feature your charity of choice. And when I come on,
still here.
Come on, there we go.
Yep.
Your charity of choice, Little Yellow Schoolhouse. Talk about that.
Okay, so when we originally talked, and that I have a tremendous love of animals, and you had suggested a couple of animal charities, and as you know, I'd rather spend time with animals than with humans many days of the week. And I was thinking about that because we did start a dog rescue, a charity on the Riviera Maya several years ago, where at any given time there are 60 to 80 dogs that are looking for homes, and still involved in that. And my Grayson's mom is still involved in that to a big extent too.
I still contribute from time to time.
Yes, yeah. But then I thought about it, and when Grayson was dealt the cards that he was dealt with, living in Mexico, unless you live in Mexico City, it was very challenging. Even if you had the financial means, it was very challenging to find safe environments. And what do I mean by that? It meant if you wanted to try and integrate Grayson into normalcy, whatever that is. But if you wanted him to go to a school, there were very few places that you could send him where the teachers and the the staff understood the challenges that he faced. And the little yellow schoolhouse is on Isla Mujeres. And I know you know where this is, Bob, but for those who don't, Isla Mujeres is a beautiful, one of my favorite places in the world, a little island just off the coast of Cancun. It's about a 15-minute ferry ride north of Cozumel. So literally north of Cancun. And they have this little yellow schoolhouse. It's very small. They have 54 students, I believe, and they have about 20 staff, because obviously you need a high ratio of staff to students. They have close to 30 kids on the waiting list, waiting to get in. And it's 100% donations. They're not funded by government. They have no grants. They rely 100% off of donations. So I thought that's a worthy cause, because there are so many children all over Mexico, regardless of where you are, that if they have some need that is unique and special, there's not a lot of available resources for them. So I thought that would be a good charity.
Well, as I also indicated to you and promised you, that because you have been so generous, and I know that when you're doing your coaching that your fees are much higher than this, but I always do contribute $50 to your charity. So I will send them $50.
I appreciate that. And every little bit helps. Yeah. I mean, they need food, they need pencils, they need paper, they need crutches, they need, you name it, they need it. Right?
Yeah, I can imagine. Mm-hmm. Well, mi amigo.
Yep.
Here we are.
Yeah.
And we're by the way, thank you for dressing up these slides. I should send all my BobCast slides to you and let you dress them up. Although I know who did this. It wasn't you.
What do you mean? What are you talking about?
I know who did it.
Just because I happen to have my own personal graphic designer, on a call, speed dial.
Well, we all should.
Yeah. Well, let me just say, for the criticalthoughtlab.com, Bob knows this. My graphic designer is my significant other, and she is a absolutely incredible designer. Has done more websites over the past several years than you can shake a stick at, and just does tremendous work. So I gave her a lot of content, single space, 50, 100 pages. And by the way, she also did that with the book that I wrote for my son. She did the same thing. She took this 300 pages of single line, me spewing what I felt, and converted it into something that graphically, I think she did a tremendous job. Now, she'd have conversations with me every half an hour about, you need to be more succinct, you need to be more parsimonious. I mean, that's very challenging.
Not just as a designer and editor.
Yeah, that's very, very challenging for me. But
buddy.
Yeah. And she's just brought it to life as she did the book that I wrote. So she's done a great job. So hats off to her.
Yeah, hats off to her. Hats off to you, my friend, because I know this is a labor of love. And I was pleasantly surprised. I think it's $149 a year, and I enjoy the content. I'm in my second week, and there's some things that have tickled my brain. And
yeah, and it's not all serious stuff. We have a brain teaser in there on every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We have some random stuff, some facts that maybe you weren't thinking were the case, but are indeed the case. And then, of course, we have the more intellectual stuff on the deep dive series on Fridays. And it's like you said, it's been a labor of love. I've spent the past several months, writing a lot of content for it, spending a lot of time and energy on it. And it's not for everybody. I'm going to take a leaf out of your book and start doing some YouTube stuff too, because it's just a fact of life. A lot of people don't like to read. They would like to, they like to see something visual. I get it. So, coming soon on YouTube will be some stuff there. And if I can help one person just, make better decisions and cut through the noise, then it's a job well done.
I have a similar goal in life. My goal in life is that if I can improve the quality of one life, then I will have succeeded in just one. So if it happens to be 10, fine. But it goes back to your the point you made about small incremental positive changes. The NFL has picked up the moniker now called 1%, that we're going to be 1% better this week than we were last week. 1%, 1%. Well, wouldn't they all love to be able to do that?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a learning curve for me too, Bob. I have to tell you, I'm a very, very private person, as you know, and we've mentioned it earlier. My table of life, the people I have around my table, is quite small and very selective. People there, of which you're one. So if you read that about section on the Critical Thought Lab, it's pretty throws it out there. This is who I am, and this is the ups and downs I've had in my life, and this is why I feel I'm qualified to produce something like this. That was not, excuse me, that was not easy for me to do.
Well, you are a private person, but to know you know just about everything there is to know about you. So I'm flattered to be one of those people, and I'm really flattered that you did this to me. I'm going to stop the recording, and you and I can just kind of wrap it up. And God bless you, buddy. I really appreciate you doing this and taking your time. And I'm not going to wish you luck on your gig here. I'm going to tell you that you will be successful.
Thank you. I mean, it's not my be all and end all. There's other things going on in my life in terms of business, but it's something that I'm very passionate about.
Oh, you're paying it forward.
Well, I'm honored to be on the podcast. I appreciate it, Bob.